Hello. Everyone got the passage? The passage is Mark 5, verse 21 to 43. Cool. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she may be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed against him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt it in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that some of his power had gone from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, she told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came up from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave them strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat.
All righty, thank you. Ooh, we're loud. You know what? Probably don't need the mask anymore. There it is. Firstly, thanks for having me this week. It has been really, really great. I mean, if this is your first day here, then thanks for having me today. It's been really great to be able to just be able to communicate a little bit from one of these books in the Bible that we hold up to be authored by someone who was walking with Jesus, and also authored by God in a sense that he wants to reveal to us more about who he is, who we are, and what he has done for us, what that means for us in ways that we can't get from just observing the world around us. And in this passage, this text that we just read today, we saw, one woman and one young girl in really dire straits, one father significantly grieving. And today I'm going to be talking to you about why Christians believe that Jesus is the answer to or for the outcast, the lonely, and the marginalised. Now we've looked at things like why faith in Jesus and science are actually friends and not enemies, and we can get technical in those kinds of senses. And today I want to talk about loneliness in particular, but also because the people who are marginalised and outcast necessarily are cut off from community, cut off in that sense of loneliness. And we're living in a time of particular loneliness, the likes of which I don't know if humans have really ever seen before. At the moment, most of Australia is in lockdown. And a friend of mine works for Lifeline, and he said that this last Monday, so just a couple of days ago, was their highest day for calls as Lifeline. So people who are thinking about ending their lives, their largest number of calls for a day ever was this last Monday. And then last week was the highest week for calls ever. 2 weeks ago, their highest week of calls ever. So it's not just like a spike at the beginning of a lockdown, but it is a worsening, he calls it a shadow pandemic of loneliness and suffering and depression from being not just physically distanced from others, but being relationally distanced from others. We live in an age of not just like a mandated physical and, in a sense, relational distancing, but we do this ourselves as well. We do this especially in the age of social media, where we have these carefully curated personal brands, our own projection to the world of who we want the world to know us as, so we can hide who we don't want to be known as, and we want to hide who we really are, and who we think people are going to like. We want to project that out there to the world. A couple of months ago, my wife, she in the past has written a blog and has had tens of thousands or sometimes hundreds of thousands of shares and views and things like this. She hopped on social media. She's a very, very funny human being. And so has people who, follow her and really enjoy the things that she has to say and post. Anyway, she posted a video of my 4-year-old daughter wearing like this bunny suit, flipping the bird out the window down Anzac Highway. And 30 million people saw my little 4-year-old daughter flipping the bird out the window going down Anzac Highway. It was on the news. I don't know, it must have been a slow news day. And she starts getting phone calls from people saying, hey, can we talk to the 4-year-old bunny-wearing, bird-flipping girl? And she's like, no, you can't. But then she's thinking, oh my goodness, I had 1 million likes on my last post. What's my next post going to be where I can grow this thing? And then all of a sudden she goes, oh, wait a second, I am being suckered in to this social media world of a carefully curated personal brand, this veneer, this veil that shadows or obfuscates who I really am from the world and tries to project an image of how I want to be known or what I want to be known as. We don't let people know us anymore. We kind of take that online world and we import it into our offline world, and we only want people to think the best of us. And so we hide away those thoughts that we think are ugly or that are legitimately ugly. We think, man, if this person knew what I really thought, they would reject me. Or if they found out that I didn't really like this or didn't really think this way or didn't really join them in this kind of life, then I would never really be loved. Not realizing that when we do this, we're actually preventing ourselves from ever actually being known. The only thing that's known about us is what we choose to be known about us. And because we prevent ourselves from ever being truly known, we prevent ourselves from ever being truly loved, and we are entrenching ourselves in loneliness and fear that people will actually find out who we are. Because if they find out who we are, they wouldn't love me because of my carefully curated, projected image of who I say I want to be known as. At the same time, when it comes to just thinking about Jesus being for the lonely and the outcast and the marginalised, in Australia, or in the Western world really, Christianity has a somewhat earned reputation of being for the rich and the powerful, and to be for clamoring to claim our rights and protect our rights. If you look at the history of, especially the early church and the non-Western church, you would see, if you told this to people in those places, they would laugh at you and say, no, that Jesus is not about clamoring for power and prestige and rights and money. So who is Jesus to the outcast, the marginalised and the lonely? We saw in this text today. Jesus travelling with his disciples, just had a little boat ride. This guy Jairus, who's a local religious leader, comes up to him and says, Jesus, he doesn't use these words, but he says, Jesus, I either believe you are who you say you are, or at least that you can do something for my daughter. She's at death's door. I believe that you can save her. And so Jesus says, yeah, let's go. On the way, mad crowds, pushing in around him. We just heard on the video. And another woman comes up to him, and she has been bleeding for 12 years. And this is not just a physical ailment for her, but in her culture, it means that she would have been an outcast and marginalised, ritually unclean. That people would not have been able to touch her, some people wouldn't have been able to associate with her. So we have this woman for over a decade of her life who's been on the margins of society, on the margins of her culture, and not just relationally, but also physically spent all of her money trying to get herself healed. And she likewise thinks to herself, I believe that Jesus is who he says he is. He can help me in this way. She's desperate. Jairus is desperate. This woman is desperate. I don't know if you know much or if you've dealt with many people who live on the margins of even our society, let alone just the global society. Many people are significantly desperate, without hope, no end of their suffering in sight. And just like this woman, it's not just a static physical oppression, it's actually just getting worse and worse and worse. No end in sight. And then all of a sudden, hope comes to her town. And she thinks to herself, if I can just touch Jesus, if I can just get Jesus, then not only will I be healed, but I'll be no longer on the margins, no longer outcast. I mean, even just being on the margins, nothing wrong with being on the margins, but being outcast it's a death sentence in this culture. She believes Jesus is who he said he is. She went to Jesus to fix her body, but he doesn't just deal with her body. He's the answer to her loneliness and her marginalization. And she gets healed. Jesus finds her, speaks with her, again, like you heard in the video, loves her, calls her daughter, says, family. Your faith has made you well. Your faith was rightly placed. You are right to believe that I am who I said I am. And then she was free. And just even as they're still talking, the reports come that Jairus' daughter has died. And so Jairus, obviously, he was already desperate and now at a loss. Jesus says, you don't need to fear, just believe. He says, you believed when you came to me, you can continue to believe that I am who I say I am. Goes to this daughter's lifeless body, tells her to get up. And Jesus, just like we saw on Wednesday, just with the power of his breath, just with his word, he creates life. Just with his word, he brings life back to her. Doesn't apply an ointment, doesn't perform a magical ritual, doesn't call upon any other power. In his own power, just with his breath, brings this girl back to life. And they're all rightly astounded. So what does this tell us about what does this tell us about Jesus? What does it tell us about us as well? Firstly, it shows that Jesus has time for you. It's not like Jesus is sitting on some distant throne somewhere, set and forget world. Here's all of the laws of physics and nature, and away you go, and I'm just going to go over here and do my own thing. No, he's intimately, imminently involved with his creation, loves his creation, on his way to help one person, but he still has time for the other who reaches out to him. He has time for her, stops for her, loves her. Even though if he was just an ordinary, especially being a teacher of some renown, like these crowds were gathering around him, they wanted more of him. He was a rock star at the time. He should have been disassociating from the unclean, the ritually unclean. He should have been ignoring the ones on the margins. But that's not who Jesus is. He loved her. He loves her. And he goes to her. And he frees her. We've got to know he's not too busy for you either. We are in a culture that celebrates success and celebrity and good-lookingness and achievement. And for those who aren't those things, who are already on the margins, and then you add a physical disability, or then you add cultural ostracism to that as well, and those people are not celebrated by our culture. Sometimes they're put up on a pedestal so that we can collectively feel good about ourselves. I don't know, we really care for them, but then after that week or day, back in the box. We want to celebrate the powerful, the accomplished, the good-looking. And Jesus here, He pursues you for you, not because you're awesome, not because you've earned it, not because you're lovely, but because He chooses to love you. His time for you. He chooses to love you. And even when it seemed like He was arriving too late for Jairus' daughter, like, Jesus is never late. There's nothing outside of Jesus' purview or like control. He is the sovereign God who breathes, and galaxies must come into existence in obedience to His voice, and He breathes and brings life back to a lifeless body. And likewise, Jesus is the answer to your loneliness. It's possible, in fact, I know you know this. I know it's possible, you know it's possible, to be in a crowded room and still be very lonely. To be amongst people, even people who you like, and still, because you've been trying to hide away those like deep, darkest parts of yourself or your thoughts or your life from other people, and you're constantly thinking, man, if they figure me out, they will reject me. If they just knew what I felt about this, or what I really thought, or what I've really done, if they really knew any of these things. Or I don't really belong here, but they haven't figured it out yet. So I'm just going to try to kind of go along. Maybe your mind doesn't work the same as other people's minds. And you just don't feel normal, even in a crowd of people, even people you get along with. You don't feel like you're really a part of the team, really a part of the crew. Jesus has dealt with marginalization. He has pursued the outcast, and He deals with our loneliness in actually a bunch of amazing ways. Firstly, in dealing with our separation from God, our biggest relational need. We've looked at this every day so far. We were estranged from the love of God because of our rebellion, because of our sin. But Jesus has dealt with our sin, dealt with our rebellion, and overcome our enmity with God, overcome our estrangedness with God. It's not that He's just taken us out of being a bad person and said, here you go, I've wiped the slate clean, now go and be a good person. It's not that He's saved us from death and brought us into life, but He's saved us from all of those things and brought us into His family. It's actually made us sisters and brothers. And Christians believe we share an inheritance with Him, with Jesus. Like the perfect one, God the Son, the Holy One of Heaven, who lived the perfect life. And that because we've been saved by Him, because we have union with Him, He doesn't just wipe the slate clean, but He treats us as if we've done everything right. He gives to us His own holiness. And not only does He obliterate our enmity with God, He doesn't just wipe the slate clean. He brings us into holiness. Brings us into the family of God. It's the most wonderful thing Jesus does. Calling us brothers and sisters. Not, well, I pulled you through, you're walking out onto the road, a bus was coming and I yanked you off the road, now go and don't do it again. But we were already dead in our sin, and He speaks and brings us back to life, and then brings us into His family and loves us. Loves you like a sister or like a brother. Secondly, Jesus frees us from having to have that carefully curated veneer or veil or projection of how we want to be thought of by everyone, which totally prevents us from actually being known or loved by anyone. He's made it so that we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to pretend anymore. We don't have to pretend in order to fit in anymore, because Jesus knows everything about us. There are no secrets. There's nothing hidden. We've seen it yesterday and the day before. Jesus, even knowing the people's thoughts before they have a chance to articulate them verbally, he knows everything. And this is not one of those, Santa Claus kind of karmic. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. It's not that kind of interaction or relationship with God. He knows every thought, every fear, every desire. And rather than saying, you go and please me, you go and climb the moral ladder and get over some sort of threshold to please me, rather he himself has paid the price for our rejection of God in Christ. And Jesus himself has reconciled us to God. Meaning that no matter our fears, no matter your desires, no matter those things you wish you could keep hidden, not that you could hide them away from God, but you don't need to try anymore. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to fear anymore. Because you're loved right now by the God who already knows everything about you. And so there's no more shame. There's no more fear. There's no more hiding. Because Jesus has totally dealt with all of those things. It means that we always have God with us. He's not an absent father. He never walks out on his family. He's with you forever. Forever. This is the kind of family that Jesus is calling you into. He's inviting you into. It's that forever family. It's that never again lonely family. It's that no matter where you are, in the center, on the fringes of society, even if you're outcast, you always belong in the family of God. You always belong. Thirdly, Jesus isn't just drawing you to himself, but he draws you into his family. So it's not just you and God, although it's nothing less than that. But it's also you, now Jesus' sister or brother, son or daughter of the Father, and also brother and sister of everyone else in the family. Jesus doesn't just deal with loneliness, he obliterates it by bringing you into his family, into community with one another. So just the single small community that I belong to down in Glenelg, like the church down there, just one of hundreds of churches in Adelaide and thousands of churches across the world that all meet, geographically, but we're all one family united to Jesus. Just in my little one kind of expression of Jesus' family just down there, we are so diverse and so broadly demographic. It's amazing in such a small, it's a few hundred people, but still amazingly broad. We have all kinds of different vocations: doctors, engineers, teachers, business owners, students, like legit multimillionaires, and people who have, as recently as last week, been homeless. We've got full-time parents, ex-convicts, people with disabilities, nurses, single mums, people on Centrelink, clean-cut people, super tattooed people, people with mental illnesses, very smart people, less smart people, outgoing people, shy people, married, single, divorced, same-sex attracted, white Australians, Asians, Indigenous Australians, South Americans, Africans, Europeans, old people, young people, people who grew up in the church, people who have never stepped foot in a church in their life before coming into this community, people who grew up in the occult, people who grew up in nice families that were very secular, people who grew up with no family, even Port Power supporters. It is incredibly diverse. You walk into one of our gatherings where people are coming together and you would say, there is nothing that brings these people together. They have nothing in common. They don't share a common first language. They don't share a common socioeconomic status, not even common politics, not common sporting affiliations, not common abilities, not common looks, nothing except for the fact that they have been radically loved by Jesus and brought into his family. And they've responded to his love and come into his family. Jesus totally does away with loneliness. The Christian community, at its best, is the most liberating, freeing, most loving, most diverse family. Unfortunately, we do not always live up to that. In fact, we regularly don't live up to that. But this is the kind of family that God is calling us into. And this is the family that God is calling you into. A family that we don't judge one another according to our weakest moments. We can be vulnerable with one another because we have been forgiven by Jesus so greatly, because we have been already brought from spiritual death and brought into his family. We have nothing but love and but forgiveness. It is a travesty when Christians look down on people, when Christians judge people who don't know Jesus. That's not what we do. We have been forgiven, and so we must forgive. Christian community, like the Christian family, is the most forgiving family. We are that like veil laid down, no more projection, no more like, here's the veneer of what I want to be known as. All of that has been, like, all those things are torn down, or at least should be, because of what Jesus has done. And we can now be wholly vulnerable with one another because we know we have been accepted by Jesus, and because we can accept somebody else and not hold their sin against them, just like Jesus hasn't held ours against us. It is the most liberating, freeing, loving, diverse family, the family of God. And God is, I believe, the reason you're here is God is inviting you into his family today. Let me pray for you. Father, I want to again thank you that you have dealt with loneliness. It is, it's endemic. It's everywhere, Father, at the moment especially. Help us, we who know you, to just like Jesus came to those who were on the margins, the lonely, and the outcasts, that we too would likewise go to those who are lonely and outcasts and on the margins. And just as we've been forgiven, that we would also forgive, and just like we've been loved, we would also love, and just like we've been brought into your family, we would also extend your invitation to others to come into your family. And Father, for everyone here, that's my greatest hope, that people would know the joy of being in your family, that those who are lonely will know that you are with them and always. That you don't just save people from their sin and then you look after them when they die, but you call them into a family even now, a relationship with you even now. And so, Father, help us have open hearts, open minds, and open spirits to your Holy Spirit today, in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys.